Ratings agency Moody's has revised South Africa's outlook to negative. This is just another step that could further see the country descend to junk status. But for more of this, I'm joined by Economist Azar Jammine just to give us more clarity in what this all means. Thank you so much, Azar, for joining us.
Pleasure, Jammine.
I suppose my first question to you is, did you expect the Moody's rating? Was that the announcement you expected to hear?
You know, for much of the past year, people have been expecting Moody's to consider downgrading South Africa's credit rating. And certainly the precursor to such a downgrade in credit rating is to downgrade the credit rating outlook. It's not, we're still in investment grade status, but the outlook has gone to negative, which is a warning sign that next time round there's a high chance that they will downgrade us to junk.
Yeah. So please then give us context. What contributed to that?
Now, earlier this year, you know, we could see the deterioration in our financial position, especially with regard to state-owned enterprises, and the fact that the economy was, you know, the state-owned enterprises are in such a bad financial state that government is having to bail them out, which increases government expenditure. Secondly, the economy itself has been growing far more slowly than previously anticipated, and that means that the growth in tax revenues has been falling short of what was budgeted for. So the combination of these two factors has resulted in a huge increase in the differential between revenue and expenditure,
right,
which has to be borrowed. That's called the budget deficit. And it has had to be revised upwards from 4.5 to 6, and basically to 6% of GDP.
Yeah.
Now that is an enormous amount of extra money that South Africa has to borrow. And it doesn't end here. If economic growth persists in being suboptimal in the next few years, as is now being forecast, then tax revenues will still be very short, and unless the government acts dramatically in cutting back certain other expenditures, such as and fixes the SOEs,
right,
the public debt will just carry on rising inexorably, and then junk status implies that ratings agencies see there to be a risk of a default by the government. In other words, if you've lent money to the government by buying government bonds and it defaults, you lose your money.
Right. It seems the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, kind of expected this response. He was hoping for the best, but he did kind of expect that we may not be in good standing with Moody's. But in as far as responses are concerned, how has been investors' response to this rating?
Well, what happened is about 2 months ago, Moody's came around to the market and said, don't worry, guys, we're going to be patient, we're going to give the government a chance to conduct their reforms. Suddenly we get the medium-term budget policy statement where Tito Mboweni, brilliant speech, says these are the problems, we need to tackle them. And then you look at the numbers and they show absolutely no commitment to actually doing anything about it. And so the mood changed immediately, and people, some analysts even expected Moody's to downgrade us to junk last Friday. And to some extent, the fact that they haven't yet done that, but given us a bit of breathing space until the February budget, was well received by the markets, and the rand rallied a little today.
Yeah. But surely it does still raise, you know, some stakes for the minister, you know, for the upcoming February budget speech.
Of course it raises stakes, and cynics would argue that the minister may have had a hand in trying to get the ratings agency to send this message so that his colleagues would see that this is a crisis situation, and that if they carry on dilly-dallying, we are going to go to junk, and that's going to see interest rates rising and less money being available for vital other areas of government spending.
Yeah. Azam, you know, this is a conversation that usually happens between analysts and economists, but let's also talk about, you know, the ordinary South African. How does this then affect the consumer?
Well, clearly, if the rand falls because foreigners decide to sell out of South African government bonds because they suddenly acquire a junk status, that leads to higher inflation, increased costs of food, petrol and other goods, and so the consumer gets impoverished. It also reduces the scope for the South African Reserve Bank to reduce interest rates any further, notwithstanding the fact that inflation is really very subdued at the moment.
Yeah. In terms of expectations then, should there be, you know, any major reforms by February then? What should we expect?
What government needs to do is to just convey a real commitment and certain definite decisions and timelines on how to fix SOEs. Even the ESCOM paper that was released last week had a lot of ideas, but it didn't actually say this is what we are going to do. It just said, you know, it's a nice room for discussion. Well, we've had room for discussion for many, many years. And the second one is, how do we cut back on the growth of the public sector remuneration bill? And that involves fighting the public service unions, and that's not going to be easy.
Right. All right, then, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Thank you so much, Azar, for your time.
Pleasure.
Okay, then. Well, of course, that's Azar Jammine joining us, talking about the rating agency, of course, Moody's, rating us from a stable to negative.